The massive view screen in the Galactic Council chamber flickered to life, showing the blue-green pearl that was Earth floating serenely in space. Ambassador Zeke's Theta's tentacles writhed with barely contained excitement as he addressed the assembled representatives of the Galactic Empire. His species, the Vorthok, had conquered 1,000 worlds, and this primitive backwater would be their next trophy. Esteemed members of the Council, Zeke's Theta's translator buzzed, converting his clicking sounds into the common tongue. Our scouts report that the inhabitants of this world possess only basic nuclear technology and have barely colonized their own moon. They call themselves humans, and they will make excellent laborers for our mining operations. The other species in the chamber murmured their approval. The insectoid Kretok clicked their mandibles in anticipation of new breeding grounds. The crystalline shard hummed at frequencies that spoke of their desire for Earth's mineral wealth. Even the ancient celestials, beings of pure energy who rarely concerned themselves with material matters, pulsed with interest. Commander Vrex of the Empire's military forces stood, his forearms crossed in a gesture of supreme confidence. His scarred exoskeleton told the story of 100 successful conquests. My fleet stands ready. We can have their defenses neutralized within a single rotation of their star. These humans have never faced an interstellar force. They divide themselves into primitive nation-states and waste resources fighting each other. Then it is decided. The High Chancellor's voice boomed through the chamber. Earth shall become the newest addition to our empire. Send the standard ultimatum. The message was transmitted across the vast distances of space, arriving at Earth's communication arrays with all the pomp and ceremony the empire could muster. It demanded immediate surrender, the dismantling of all weapons, and the submission of Earth's population to imperial rule. The humans had 72 of their hours to comply. In the United Nations building in New York, an emergency session convened. President Sarah Chen of the United States sat beside Premier Mikhail Volkov of Russia, their usual tensions forgotten in the face of an existential threat. Prime Minister Amara Okafor of the African Union leaned forward, studying the alien message that played on repeat. They want us to surrender, General Martinez said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Just like that. As if we're some primitive tribe that will bow down at the first sign of superior technology. Omen, what are our options? Asked Director Yamamoto of the Japanese Defense Force. Dr. Elias Reeves, the world's leading xenobiologist, cleared his throat. Based on the technology displayed in their message, their ships could reach Earth within weeks. Their weapons, he paused, swallowing hard. Their weapons make our nuclear arsenal look like firecrackers. The room fell silent. Then, unexpectedly, President Chen began to laugh. It wasn't the laugh of someone who had lost their mind, but rather the laugh of someone who had just realized something profound. You know what they don't know about us? She said, looking around the room. They see our divided nations and assume we're weak. They see our conflicts and assume we're primitive. But they don't know our history. They don't know what humans are capable of when pushed to the brink. Premier Volkov nodded slowly. Stalingrad, he said simply. Thermopylae, added the Greek ambassador. The Warsaw Ghetto, whispered the Israeli representative. The Alamo, General Martinez said, his jaw set. One by one, the representatives began listing names. Places where humans had stood against impossible odds. Where they had faced certain death and chose to fight anyway. Where the arithmetic of war had said defeat was inevitable, but the human spirit had said otherwise. Dr. Reeves pulled up his tablet. I've been studying their message. Their technology is superior. Yes, but it's not magic. They follow the same laws of physics we do. And if there's one thing humans have always been good at, it's finding creative ways to level the playing field. The emergency session transformed into a war council. Within hours, every major power on Earth had shared their most classified military secrets. Russian stealth technology merged with American cyber warfare capabilities. Chinese manufacturing power combined with European precision engineering. African resource networks connected with South American guerrilla expertise. For the first time in human history, the entire species worked as one. In laboratories around the world, scientists who had spent their careers competing for Nobel Prizes now shared their research freely. Dr. Lisa Chen in California connected via quantum-encrypted channels with Dr. Rajesh Patel in Mumbai, combining their work on directed energy weapons. In underground bunkers, military strategists studied every war humanity had ever fought, looking for patterns, tactics, anything that might give them an edge. The Galactic Empire's scouts, monitoring Earth's communications, reported back to the Council with confusion. "They're not surrendering," Scout Captain Theta reported. "In fact, they seem to be excited." Zix Theta's tentacles twisted in annoyance. Excited? They face the might of the Empire, and they're excited? Perhaps they don't understand the message, suggested a junior analyst. Their technology is primitive. Maybe something was lost in translation. "Send it again," Zix Theta ordered. "Make it clearer. Show them images of worlds that resisted. Show them what happened to those who refused our generous offer of subjugation." The second message arrived on Earth, showing the burnt husks of planets, the enslaved populations, the strip-mined worlds left barren and dead. The humans studied these images carefully. In a bunker beneath the Pentagon, General Martinez looked at the images with professional interest. "Notice their attack patterns," he said to his staff. "They rely on overwhelming force and shock tactics. They expect enemies to break at the first assault. Like every bully in history," Colonel Sarah Thompson observed, "they've never faced someone who punches back." The humans sent their response. It was short, simple, and broadcast on every frequency the aliens had used. "We choose war." And "We choose war." In the Galactic Council chamber, the message played in stunned silence. No species had ever responded to the Empire's ultimatum with such brevity, such confidence. "They choose war?" Zix Theta's translator struggled with the disbelief in his voice. "They've seen our power? And they choose war?" Commander Vrex stood, his warrior's instincts troubled. "Something is wrong. No primitive species reacts this way. They're either insane or what?" the High Chancellor demanded. "Or they know something we don't." The commander's words hung in the air like a prophecy. Around Earth, the hastily constructed defense platforms came online. They were ugly things, built for function over form, bristling with weapons that human ingenuity had cobbled together from theoretical physics and desperate necessity. In homes around the world, parents tucked their children into bed with stories of heroes who had stood against the darkness. They spoke of Churchill's speeches during the Blitz, of the Underground Railroad, of every time in human history when ordinary people had done extraordinary things. The factories that had once produced consumer goods now churned out weapons. The social media networks that had spread cat videos now coordinated global resistance. The scientists who had argued about climate change now worked together to weaponize the weather itself. Humanity had received the Empire's ultimatum. They had seen the fate of worlds that surrendered. They had calculated the odds of victory, and they had chosen to fight, not because they thought they would win, but because they were human. And humans had a long, bloody history of looking at impossible odds and saying, "Let's find out what happens." The Empire wanted war. They were about to learn why, throughout human history. That had always been a mistake. As the alien fleet began its journey toward Earth, humans around the world prepared. They sharpened not just their weapons, but their resolve. They drew upon thousands of years of warfare, of resistance, of sheer stubborn refusal to bow to anyone who demanded submission. The Galactic Empire had conquered 1,000 worlds. They had never conquered a species that had spent its entire evolutionary history perfecting the art of war against itself. They had never faced a species that had turned mutually assured destruction into a valid diplomatic strategy. They had never encountered beings who could look at certain death and smile. They were about to education in human history, and the tuition would be paid in blood. The first wave of the Imperial fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system with the practiced precision of 1,000 conquests. Admiral Krextor stood on the bridge of his flagship, the inevitable Doom, watching the tactical display with 6 of his 8 eyes. The other 2 were reviewing the latest intelligence reports from Earth, and what he saw made his chitin-covered brow furrow in confusion. "Tactical Officer Vreen," he called out. Confirm these readings. The young officer's antennae twitched nervously. Confirmed, Admiral. The humans have constructed a defensive perimeter around their planet. Our analysts count approximately 10,000 orbital platforms. 10,000? Krextor's mandibles clicked in what his species considered laughter. They built 10,000 platforms in 3 weeks? They must be desperate, throwing together whatever scrap metal they could find. His assumption was reasonable. Most species, when faced with the Empire's ultimatum, either surrendered immediately or managed to construct perhaps a dozen defensive satellites. The humans' response seemed like the panicked reaction of primitives who didn't understand the futility of their situation. "Sir," communications officer, Thek interrupted, "we're receiving a transmission from Earth. Put it through." The view screen showed a human female in military uniform, General Patricia Williams, commander of Earth's newly formed United Defense Force, looked directly at the camera with eyes that held no fear. "Imperial Fleet," she said calmly. "You are entering sovereign human space. This is your only warning. Turn back now, or face the consequences." The bridge erupted in laughter. Various species expressed their amusement in different ways. Chittering, humming, flashing bioluminescent patterns. The idea that primitives who had barely achieved spaceflight would warn off the Imperial fleet was the height of absurdity. Admiral Krextor composed himself. "Open a channel. This is Admiral Krextor of the Imperial Fleet. Your warning is noted and dismissed. Power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. Any resistance will result in the complete annihilation of your species." General Williams smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "Admiral, are you familiar with human history? Your history is irrelevant. You face the might of, specifically," Williams continued as if he hadn't spoken, "are you familiar with a human named Hannibal Barca?" Krextor's tactical officer quickly pulled up the reference. "A primitive military commander from their pre-spaceflight era, sir. He fought something called the Roman Empire, using inferior forces." "Inferior forces," Williams repeated, her smile widening. "He crossed the Alps with elephants. Admiral, do you know what the Alps are? Mountains that were considered impassable. He lost half his army in the crossing. Any reasonable being would have turned back, but Hannibal wasn't reasonable. He was human." "Your point?" Krextor demanded, though something in the human's confidence was beginning to unsettle him. "My point, Admiral, is that Hannibal won. He won because he did what his enemies thought was impossible. Just like we're about to do to you." The transmission ended. Krextor turned to his fleet. "All ships, advance in standard formation. Prepare for minimal resistance." The Imperial fleet moved forward with the same tactics that had won them 1,000 worlds. The massive dreadnoughts led the way, their shields powered to maximum, their weapons charging for the devastating Alpha Strike that typically ended battles before they began. They were 2 million kilometers from Earth when the first surprise hit them. "Admiral," the sensor officer's voice cracked with panic. "The human platforms, they're not weapons platforms. They're mines, sir. Fusion mines. Impossible. No species wastes resources on static defenses at that scale." His words were cut off as 10,000 fusion mines detonated simultaneously. The humans had learned something from their own history. They had studied the Battle of Kursk, where the Soviets had laid more mines than had ever been concentrated in a single area. They had remembered the effectiveness of static defenses when properly employed, and they had applied those lessons on a stellar scale. The explosion lit up the solar system. The carefully coordinated detonation created a wall of superheated plasma and electromagnetic interference that washed over the Imperial fleet. Shields designed to handle focused beam weapons and kinetic strikes flickered and failed under the overwhelming area bombardment. "Damage report," Krextor demanded, gripping his command chair as his ship shuddered. 30% of the fleet has lost primary shields. Navigation systems are scrambled. We've lost contact with Admiral. Another voice interrupted, detecting massive gravitational anomalies. "The humans. They've weaponized their gas giants." It was impossible. It was insane. But the humans had done it anyway. They had seeded Jupiter and Saturn with devices that created artificial gravitational pulses, turning the planets into massive area denial weapons. Imperial ships found themselves caught in shifting gravitational fields that tore at their hull integrity and sent navigation computers into recursive loops. On Earth, in the command bunker, General Williams watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction. Phase 1, complete. Initialize, Phase 2. Across the solar system, hidden facilities on Mars, the Moon, and dozens of asteroids came to life. The humans had learned another lesson from their history: the power of distributed defense. Just as the Viet Cong had used tunnel networks to confound a technologically superior foe, humanity had turned the entire solar system into a fortress. Railguns fired from Mars, accelerating projectiles to significant fractions of light speed. Mass drivers on asteroids launched clouds of debris into carefully calculated trajectories. Even Earth's weather satellites had been weaponized, their communication lasers overcharged into makeshift energy weapons. The Imperial fleet found itself not in a battle, but in a storm. Attacks came from every direction, from sources they couldn't identify or predict. Their tactical computers, designed for traditional space combat, couldn't process the chaotic nature of human warfare. "This is impossible," Krextor roared. "They're primitives. They don't have the technology for this." His science officer pulled up the analysis. "Sir, individually, none of their weapons are particularly advanced. But they've combined them in ways our tactical doctrine never anticipated. They're using guerrilla tactics. In space. Guerrilla tactics don't work in space," Krextor insisted. "There's nowhere to hide, but the humans had found a way. They used the solar system's natural debris, the asteroid belt, the radiation fields of Jupiter, even the solar wind itself as cover. Ships would appear, strike, and vanish before the Imperial fleet could respond. And then came the psychological warfare. Every Imperial ship began receiving transmissions, not demands for surrender or threats, but history lessons. The humans broadcast stories of every time in their history when a smaller force had defeated a larger one. Thermopylae, Rorke's Drift, the Winter War, Stalingrad, Vietnam, Afghanistan, not once, but multiple times as different empires learned the same lesson. They broadcast images of human resilience. London during the Blitz, Warsaw during the Uprising, Leningrad during the siege. They showed humans choosing death over surrender, choosing to fight when victory was impossible, choosing to make their enemies pay for every inch of ground. "They're insane," whispered a junior officer on the inevitable doom. "They're all insane." Oh, but Admiral Krextor was beginning to understand. The humans weren't insane. They were something far more dangerous. They were experienced. The Empire had conquered peaceful species, aggressive species, intelligent species, and primitive species. But they had never conquered a species that had spent its entire evolutionary history practicing war on itself. They had never faced a species that had turned warfare into an art form, a science, a philosophy. "Admiral," his intelligence officer reported with barely controlled fear, "I've been analyzing their history as they suggested. They've fought wars over ideology, religion, resources, territory, and sometimes just because they could. They've developed weapons that could destroy their own planet, and then pointed them at each other. They've turned killing into an industry. And now," Krextor said slowly, the full horror dawning on him, "they've turned all that experience on us." The Imperial fleet tried to adapt. They abandoned their standard tactics and attempted to match the humans' unconventional warfare. But how do you fight an enemy that has been perfecting the art of war for thousands of years? How do you defeat a species that has survived ice ages, plagues, and itself? The answer came in the form of humanity's next surprise. "Admiral, detecting massive energy signatures from Earth's surface. They're targeting us from the planet, through their own atmosphere? That's suicide. The energy loss alone, but the humans had done the impossible again. They had turned their entire planet into a weapon. Geothermal plants, nuclear reactors, solar farms, wind turbines, every source of power on Earth had been linked together and focused into massive ground-based energy weapons. The atmosphere that should have dissipated the beams had been temporarily altered using their weather control technology, creating corridors of artificially thinned air. The beams that struck the Imperial fleet weren't as powerful as ship-mounted weapons, but there were thousands of them, coming from a gravity well that made return fire difficult and costly. It was like being attacked by angry insects. No single sting was fatal, but thousands of them. "Sir," the medical officer reported, "crew morale is plummeting. The constant broadcasts about human history, combined with these tactics, several species are reporting psychological breakdown. They can't comprehend a species that seems to enjoy war." Krextor looked at his tactical display. He had started with 500 ships. He still had over 400. By any conventional measure, he was winning. But the humans showed no signs of surrender. If anything, their attacks were intensifying. "Open a channel to Earth," he ordered. General Williams appeared on the screen again. Behind her, Krextor could see humans of various ethnicities working together with a focused intensity that sent chills through his exoskeleton. "Admiral," she said calmly, "ready to discuss terms? You've lost tens of thousands in these attacks." Krextor pointed out. "Your orbital infrastructure is destroyed. You can't possibly sustain this level of resistance." Williams laughed. It was genuine laughter, which somehow made it more terrifying. "Admiral, we lost 600,000 in a single battle at the Somme. We lost 27 million in what we call World War II. We've had cities burn, nations fall, entire civilizations collapse, and we're still here. You think a few thousand casualties will make us surrender?" She leaned forward. "Let me tell you something about humans, Admiral. We're the species that looked at the atom and thought, 'I bet we can split that.' We're the species that saw birds flying and said, 'We can do that better.' We're the species that reached the moon with computers less powerful than what our children play games on." Quote, "Your point?" Krextor asked, though he was beginning to fear he already knew. "My point is that we're also the species that invented the concept of mutually assured destruction and then lived with it for decades. We're the species that will blow up our own ships to take out yours. We're the species that will turn our homeworld into a fortress, even if it means our own deaths." Her eyes hardened. "We're the species that will make you pay for every meter of space you take. And Admiral? Space is very, very big." The transmission ended. Krextor stared at the tactical display. He could continue the attack. He would probably win, but at what cost? And what would he be left with? A species that would never stop fighting, never stop resisting, never accept defeat. For the first time in the Empire's history, an admiral of the fleet faced a terrible realization. Victory against the humans might be possible, but it would never be complete. And it would cost more than any victory was worth. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened with unprecedented urgency. The magnificent chamber, which had witnessed the subjugation of 1,000 worlds, now buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from every member species took their seats. The holographic display at the center showed the ongoing battle in the Sol system, where the mighty Imperial fleet continued to struggle against humanity's unconventional resistance. High Chancellor Zeke's Theta's tentacles writhed in agitation as he called the session to order. "Esteemed members of the Council, we face an unprecedented situation. The primitive species known as humans has not only refused our generous offer of incorporation into the Empire, but has managed to inflict significant casualties upon our fleet." "Impossible," clicked the representative of the Kretok. "No primitive species has ever. The evidence is before us," the Chancellor interrupted, gesturing to the tactical display. "Admiral Krextor reports 30% casualties and requests reinforcements. He also sends a warning." The word warning sent ripples of disbelief through the chamber. The Empire didn't receive warnings from primitive species. They gave them. "Play the Admiral's message," ordered Elder Vornash of the Celestials, his energy form pulsing with concern. Admiral Krextor's image appeared, his usually immaculate uniform scorched, and his compound eyes reflecting something the Council had never seen in an Imperial Admiral before: uncertainty. "Esteemed Council," Krextor began, "I have studied the humans as you ordered. What I have discovered should give us all pause. This is not a species like any we have encountered. They have spent their entire evolutionary history perfecting warfare not against external threats, but against themselves. They have turned conflict into art, science, and philosophy. They have weapons we've never conceived of, not because they're technologically advanced, but because their minds work differently. They see warfare differently. He paused, his mandibles clicking nervously. They sent us their history, counselors. I advise you to study it. Pay particular attention to something they call the Eastern Front of their Second World War. Notice how they're willing to sacrifice millions to stop an invader. Look at their concept of scorched earth. They will destroy their own world rather than let us have it. Surely you exaggerate, the Vorthok representative interjected. No species would. They've already begun, Krextor continued. Our intelligence indicates they're preparing something they call the Samson option. If we land troops on Earth, they will detonate their entire nuclear arsenal simultaneously. The radiation will make the planet uninhabitable for centuries. They would rather die as a species than serve the Empire. The council chamber fell silent. In their 1,000 conquests, they had never encountered a species that preferred extinction to subjugation. Elder Vornash was the first to speak. Show us this history they speak of. The holographic display shifted, showing images from human history. The council watched in growing horror as they witnessed the siege of Masada, where Jewish rebels chose mass suicide over capture. They saw Soviet soldiers at Stalingrad fighting over individual rooms in frozen ruins. They watched footage of kamikaze pilots, of soldiers throwing themselves on grenades to save their comrades, of resistance fighters facing certain death with smiles on their faces. By the void, whispered the crystalline shard representative. They celebrate these acts. They build monuments to those who choose death over surrender. There's more, the intelligence analyst reported. We've decrypted their current communications. They're not just defending Earth. They're planning to attack. Attack? Chancellor Zeke's Theta's voice rose in disbelief. With what fleet? They barely have interplanetary capability. The analyst brought up new data. They call it Project Exodus. They're converting cargo ships, mining vessels, even pleasure craft into weapons. But that's not the concerning part. They're crewing them with volunteers. Millions of volunteers. They call them suicide runs. And they have more volunteers than ships. The implications sank in slowly. The Empire was accustomed to enemies who fought to survive. They had never faced an enemy that fought to make a point. Chancellor, a junior counselor spoke up hesitantly. I've been researching human military philosophy as the Admiral suggested. They have a concept called Pyrrhic victory, a victory so costly it's equivalent to defeat. They also have something called deterrence theory. The idea that the threat of unacceptable losses prevents conflict. Get to the point, the Chancellor snapped. The point, Chancellor, is that humans developed these concepts fighting each other. They've spent thousands of years learning how to make war so costly that even winning becomes losing, and now they're applying those lessons to us. On the tactical display, another Imperial dreadnought flickered and went dark. The humans had somehow turned a civilian mining ship into a relativistic kill vehicle, accelerating it to near light speed and ramming it into the larger vessel. The mining ship was vaporized, but so was the dreadnought. One human ship with a crew of volunteers had destroyed a vessel worth more than Earth's entire GDP. Play their latest transmission, Elder Vornash commanded. The screen showed a different human this time. President Sarah Chen stood before the united flags of Earth, her expression calm but determined. To the Galactic Empire, she began. We have a message for you. You came to our world expecting to find sheep. Instead, you found wolves. Wounded wolves, perhaps. Divided wolves, certainly. But wolves nonetheless. And you've done something no human has managed to do in our entire history. You've united the pack. She paused, letting her words sink in. You want to know what humans are capable of? We split the atom. We harnessed the lightning. We touched the moon with nothing but slide rules and determination. We've survived ice ages, plagues, and world wars. We've walked through the valley of death so many times we've worn a path. But here's what you really need to understand about humans. We don't just fight to win. We fight to make sure the next bully thinks twice. We fight to leave a message, and that message is simple. The cost of conquering humanity will always be higher than any possible reward. The transmission continued, but now it showed scenes from across Earth, factories working around the clock, children in schools studying stellar navigation, scientists sharing weapons research, soldiers from nations that had been enemies for generations training side by side. We've turned our entire civilization into a war machine, Chen continued. Every man, woman, and child on Earth is now part of the resistance. We've militarized our economy, our education system, our very culture. You wanted war with humanity? Congratulations. You've got it. And we have 8 billion people who are ready to show you exactly what that means. The transmission ended. The council chamber remained silent for long moments. Finally, the representative of the ancient progenitor race, who rarely spoke in council sessions, rose from his crystalline throne. His species had seen the rise and fall of galactic civilizations for eons. I have witnessed the birth and death of 1,000 empires, he said, his voice resonating through dimensions. I have seen species of great power and greater ambition. But never have I seen what I see in these humans. They have weaponized spite. They have turned vindictiveness into a survival strategy. They have made stubbornness a virtue. He paused, his form shifting through spectrums visible and invisible. More importantly, they're teaching others. Already, 3 subjugated species have begun studying human history. The Kentari are researching something called guerrilla warfare. The Penthi are learning about asymmetric conflict. The seeds of rebellion are being planted across the empire, and the humans are the gardeners. Chancellor Zeke's Theta slammed a tentacle on his podium. Then we crush them completely. Send the entire fleet. Destroy their world as an example. And prove their point? Elder Vornash countered. Show every species in the galaxy that the Empire fears humans so much we had to annihilate them? Do you know what humans call that? They call it martyrdom, and they've built entire religions around it. The debate raged for hours. Strategies were proposed and discarded. The militarists wanted overwhelming force. The economists calculated the cost and blanched. The pragmatists suggested negotiation. The traditionalists were appalled at showing weakness. Meanwhile, the battle in the Sol system continued. The humans unveiled new surprises hourly. They turned asteroids into kinetic weapons. They used their sun's solar wind as a weapon. They broadcast viruses that shouldn't have worked on alien systems but somehow did. They fought with a creativity born from millennia of finding new ways to kill each other. And through it all, they kept broadcasting. Not threats or demands, but stories. Stories of humans who had faced impossible odds. Stories of Spartans at Thermopylae, of Finns in the Winter War, of Warsaw ghetto fighters, of Vietnamese farmers defeating superpowers. They turned their history into a weapon, showing the galaxy that humans had always been the species that refused to know when they were beaten. Counselors, Admiral Krex, Tor's voice interrupted the debate. His image appeared again, and this time he looked exhausted. I must report that the humans have begun launching their Exodus ships. Hundreds of converted vessels, each on collision courses with our fleet. Our point defense systems can stop most of them, but what, Admiral? But they keep coming. For every ship we destroy, they launch 2 more. They're using everything: cargo haulers, research vessels, even museum pieces. They've turned their entire spacefaring capability into ammunition. And counselors, they're singing. Singing? War songs, sir. Battle hymns. Something called national anthems. They're broadcasting them on all frequencies. My xenopsychologist says it's a form of psychological warfare. It's working. My crew is unsettled. The progenitor spoke again. I motion for immediate cessation of hostilities and the opening of diplomatic channels. The chamber erupted in chaos. Some species roared their outrage at showing weakness. Others quietly voiced their support. The debate might have continued for days, but it was interrupted by an emergency alert. Counselors. The intelligence analyst's voice was panicked. The humans have made contact with the rebellion. The main display shifted to show intercepted communications. Human military advisors were already sharing tactical knowledge with rebel cells across the Empire. Guerrilla warfare manuals were being translated into a dozen languages. The history of successful resistance movements was being studied on worlds light years from Earth. They're not just defending their world, Elder Vornash observed quietly. They're exporting revolution. Chancellor Zix Theta sagged in his seat. The Empire had ruled for 10,000 years through a simple principle. The cost of resistance always exceeded the cost of submission. The humans had reversed that equation. They had made submission more costly than resistance, not just for themselves, but potentially for every species under imperial rule. What do you recommend, Admiral? The Chancellor asked wearily. Krextor's image flickered, the connection weakened by human interference. I recommend we do something the Empire has never done before, Chancellor. I recommend we negotiate. Because if we continue this war, even if we win, we'll never truly conquer them, and the longer we fight, the more the galaxy will see that we can be fought. The humans haven't just defended their world, Chancellor. They've infected the galaxy with the idea that the Empire can be resisted. The Council voted. It wasn't unanimous, but it was decisive. For the first time in its 10,000-year history, the Galactic Empire would negotiate with a species it had marked for conquest. As the ceasefire order went out, President Chen appeared on Earth screens. Behind her stood representatives of every nation, every culture, every group that had put aside their differences to face a common threat. People of Earth, she said, we have won the first victory. Not through superior technology, but through superior will. Not through advanced weapons, but through the oldest weapon of all, the refusal to surrender. Today, the galaxy learned what humans have always known, that some things are worth dying for, that freedom is one of them, and that any empire that forgets this lesson does so at its peril. The crowds cheered. In space, the guns fell silent, and across the galaxy, on 100 subjugated worlds, beings looked up at the stars and whispered a new word. A human word: resistance. The Galactic Empire had wanted war. The humans had given them a history lesson instead. And in that lesson was a simple truth that would echo through the stars for generations to come. Never fight a species that has turned warfare into muscle memory. Never threaten a people who have practiced dying for their freedom for millennia. And never, ever, underestimate the power of bloody-minded human stubbornness. Because humans don't just fight wars, they perfect them. And when the galaxy came calling, humanity was ready to demonstrate mastery of their oldest art.